Indo-Europeanist theoretician Maria Gimbutas called Old Europe, is in fact not European at all. It's the culture of the immigrant first agriculturers from Anatolia. And so a large percentage of the genes, the genetic makeup of the present day European population is actually immigrant Anatolian.
It is interesting actually.
Yeah.
Sumerian is considered to be a language isolate in
Yes.
Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
But the Sumerians themselves had a legend of coming from the sea.
Yes.
So probably, there could be some connection between them and Anatolia for whatever reasons. They might have sailed around.
The theory of Balagangadhara Tilak,
The
that
Arctic Circle.
yes, that they came from the Arctic, that also is not being said by anyone anymore, though that has a very interesting history. So you see, he was one of the many Indians who just absorbed the Aryan invasion theory as soon as it became popular. And so he made his own version of it. So they came from somewhere in the northwest, and then the discussion was where exactly, and so his input was, oh, the Arctic. The Proto-Indo-European, the mother tongue of all these Indo-European languages, as it has been reconstructed, follows very much the model of Sanskrit.
So, the idea of a language originating in a restricted area of space and then dispersing from that homeland, as it were, is well established. So, in the case of Indo-European, what were the competing homeland theories that were conclusively discarded?
Yes, not in chronological order. Post-war, we've had a theory, well, that existed pre-war also, but so that is persisting, a theory that it was Northern Europe. The plains of Germany, Poland, which you find in a book by Lothar Kilian from 1980 thereabouts. So that still has followers, but I guess among the people really active in the field, nobody espouses that anymore. It goes back to the German nationalist period when Penka and some more researchers, the archaeologist Gustav Kosina, thought they discovered it in Northern Europe. At the time there was no genetics yet, but there was archaeology. It was still a pioneering science, but already useful. But so here again, just as genes don't speak a language, pottery or whatever archaeologists deal with also don't speak a language. Exactly. So to say, we have archaeological proof for this Northern European homeland is doubtful anyway. Like for instance, a prime example of the political use of archaeology was research department of the SS, the Nazi elite
Secret
corps.
Yeah.
They found that in the Baltic states there had been Germans. They found proof of a German present in the Baltic states, so they said, well, we are justified in including the Baltic states into the German Empire, because ultimately this is where we were. Whereas, there's hardly a way you could prove that. In this case, even more problematic because these cultures are very closely related. I mean, it's hard to differentiate like that. But so anyway, that idea of a homeland in Northern Europe, that was there, and so that has practically been discarded. Already before the war, most people, including many Germans, thought that the homeland was rather in Eastern Europe. And at that time, they didn't think so much of Ukraine, but of Belarus, just north of Ukraine. There's a place there, the Pripyat swamps, which people thought, this must be the land of origin. They call it the Vagina Gentium, the let's say the womb of nations. That the Indo-European nations that come from there. Which is ironic because before the Holocaust started, the first idea of the Nazis was to build concentration camps or even build resettlement areas like a reserve, like the Native American reservations for the Jews. Anyway, so
Ironies.
but so that theory is pretty close to what is right now the reigning theory, that the place of origin is, Ukraine, southern Russia. Then Central Asia, which is, the same landscape, but within the same landscape, a bit more to the west, you end up in Eastern Europe, a bit more to the east, is Central Asia. Then Anatolia. So the east of Anatolia, let's say Armenia, that was a candidate also from the beginning, because of the Bible. You see, the Bible said that
Ark of Noah.
Yes,
Ark of
the Ark
Noah.
of Noah, had been found in Armenia. The reason being that in the mountains there, because of the movement of glaciers and so on through the millions of years, there is a rock formation in the shape of a ship. And so you see, they thought, this is the Ark. And Noah had 3 sons and 3 daughters-in-law, who became then the progenitors of mankind. And one of them was Japheth. So you had Sem, which is the supposed father of the Semites. Then Ham, the progenitor of the Hamites, which literally are the North Africans, the Berbers and so on, but is used for Africans in general. And because he got cursed, Hamites supposedly have the mark of Ham, which in the age of colonial slavery was interpreted as the natural status of blacks as slaves. Anyway, so those two, and then you have Japheth. Japheth is supposed to be the progenitor of the Indo-Europeans, conceived as a race. And so then it's logical to say, well, the homeland of Indo-European is Armenia. And so it's an interesting coincidence that right now, for totally different reasons, Armenia is back in favor. We'll come to that. But so Anatolia became a very serious candidate in the 90s when a British archaeologist, Colin Renfrew, theorized that the spread of the Indo-European languages went hand in hand with the spread of agriculture. So we know that, at least in Europe and in Africa, agriculture came from there. And so what the Indo-Europeanist theoretician Maria Gimbutas called Old Europe is in fact not European at all. It's the culture of the immigrant first agriculturers from Anatolia. And so a large percentage of the genes, the genetic makeup of the present day European population is actually immigrant Anatolian. So we know of this spread of the Anatolians into Europe, what is another question is what language they spoke. I was present at a historic conference in Leipzig in 2013 called Speaking Neolithic. And some speakers there spoke about the language of these first agricultures. So the Dutch Keltologist Peter Schrijver from Utrecht University, he explained, and everybody was spellbound, you know. The language of the Neolithic people, and here we speak like 10,000 years ago, much before there was writing. So when it's very difficult to reconstruct linguistic history, he said, well, the language is Sumerian, Minoic, spoken in Crete, and Hattic, which is the language spoken in Anatolia before
Hittites.
They are vaguely cognate, they form one language family. That must have been the language family that was brought into Europe by these first agriculturists. So that may be the case, you know, but that language is no longer there because of the invasion of the Indo-Europeans about 3000 BC, so 5,000 years ago. And about that, you know, there is little doubt. I mean, what language those agriculturists spoke, that may still be in doubt, though I think that Schrijver's theory has very good cards. And it's very logical, it's very plausible. At any rate, that language disappeared under the pressure of the invading Indo-Europeans. That language family has disappeared, and there's no Minoic anymore, there's no Sumerian anymore. And so in Europe, of course, there's no such thing anymore.
It is interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Sumerian is considered to be a language isolate in Mesopotamia. But the Sumerians themselves had a legend of coming from the sea.
Yes.
So probably, you know, there could be some connection between them and Anatolia for whatever reasons. They might have sailed around by the Red Sea. Yeah. So that
right. So at any rate, you know, whatever the prehistory, the Indo-Europeans coming to Europe. So that is not controversial.
3,000 years.
When you speak about the Aryan invasion, well, that's the case of an Aryan invasion. With all the stereotypes, it was definitely violent. Some people, like Christiansen, have shown that there was a strong population replacement. So the Aryans coming in from Ukraine, they did something that caused the disappearance of a large part of the native population. Native, with the footnote that large part of these natives are actually Anatolians, mixed with natives. But so they get replaced. And so that may indicate a purposeful genocide, worst case scenario. Or at any rate, you see some strong inequality that favored the procreation of the incomers and doomed the natives to at least cultural extinction.
Yes, but you know, sometimes I think that guns and steel are considered but not germs. So if these two populations, one from the Russian steppes, and one from, you know, anciently settled from Anatolia, they had been isolated for a long time and then they came into contact. Perhaps they brought new germs. I mean, because in pre-modern times to carry out a genocide on that scale would be rather difficult, even if one wanted it, I guess.
Yes, so I agree with that. And I mean, even though you have your qualities, you're not the first one to say this.
No, I'm not saying I'm the first one. It just occurred
Yes.
to me.
But so, yes, I mean, I think that's a very logical scenario. You see, in the case of Latin America, you know, many people say, and indeed I myself have written in 1993, that, millions of people were killed by the Spanish and so on. Yeah, there was some military confrontation. There was no policy of genocide, so. And so most of the people that have disappeared have done so because of the germs that the Europeans brought. Often these germs went before them. The killing was already happening to people who had never seen any Spanish soldier.
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, that happened in Europe. Later on, there is a case of deliberate
Introduction.
genocide by these germs when an Italian colony, well, trade colony in on the Black Sea was besieged by the Mongols. And so when people died of the plague, they took these corpses and catapulted them into the besieged city. And so soon the epidemic spread in the city, and many people, because of the epidemic, fled the city, went back to Italy. And, as they didn't know themselves, but they brought the germs with them, and then you get the European plague. So, yeah, that's a very plausible scenario in this case also.
Similarly, there was a plague in the Roman Empire.
Yes.
Soon after they got into a fight with the Persians.
Yes.
And they brought it back. The returning soldiers brought it back.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, these things are possible. And you see, in this case, I'm not as pessimistic as Max Muller was, throwing his hands up in the air. We will never know. I'm quite confident we will find out more detail about this.
Yes.
But so generally, there was some population replacement by whatever means. But so the end result was that Indo-European won the day.
Yes. And so currently, what are the theories of the homeland that are strong contenders?
Well, one which has definitely fallen by the wayside is that it was from Atlantis. That's also one of the contending theories before the war. And the theory of Balagangadhara Tilak,
The Arctic Circle.
Yes, that they came from the Arctic, that also is not being said by anyone anymore, though that has a very interesting history. So, you see, he was one of the many Indians who just absorbed the Aryan invasion theory as soon as it became popular. And so he made his own version of it. So they came from somewhere in the northwest, and then the discussion was where exactly. And so his input was, the Arctic. And so he found a few references in the Vedas to, let's say, strange weather patterns, which he linked to the climate in the Arctic. So, and so some nationalists in Europe, there are still some, do cite that as, you see, we have been thinking up this Aryan invasion theory, but they themselves say it. Whereas in fact, he only said it because he had learned that from Europeans.
This seems to become a tautology pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes. So those are discarded essentially now in the West. The contest is between Ukraine, Russia, and Anatolia. Anatolia, Armenia. And so about Armenia, I guess you'll bring it up eventually. But so there's this paper by Paul Haggerty of a few years ago that locates the homeland there, and he does so not so much for genetic reasons. I mean, nowadays genetic research is all the rage, but for linguistic reasons. That with which it all started. And so he says problems like the location of Hittite, for example, as very ancient and as located in Anatolia. You know, you can, I mean, he does sophisticate that line of thinking, and so he concludes for Anatolia. And if you reread his paper, well, maybe it points more to Armenia, which is more or less part of Anatolia, the eastern end of Anatolia. And so in the 80s, also, already two Soviet scholars, Gamkrelidze and Ivanov, had also located the homeland there. Even though at that time already the Volga up to Ukraine, that was already the favorite homeland. But so they said, no, this is wrong. The homeland is in the south of the Caucasus. And so I noticed that in India, quite a few scholars have fallen for this. And I mean, fallen for this sounds negative, I'm sorry. Because I do think that his theory has some points in its favor. But so they jumped at it because it offers something slightly more plausible than an invasion from the northwest, namely an invasion from the west. So they say, rather than going all around the Caspian Sea down to India, what they did was from Armenia take the straight road through Persia to India. And even traditionalists in India might like that, because you see there's an Indian tradition already, well, 1500, 2000 years old, that has to do with Manu. Manu is the supposed ancestor of the whole Sanskritic tradition. You know, he's an ancestor of the Vedas. He's already mentioned many times in the Rig Veda. And so that tradition says that he was a kind of Noah in India, or in their version, the story of Noah is a reapplication, you know, of the Indian tradition. And so he landed, he also had a boat, you know, to survive the flood. And then when the water receded, he ended up in Himachal Pradesh, in North India, in the mountains, in a place, Manali, it's called today, so Manalaya, Manu's place.
Manu's Alaya.
Yeah. And so the story says that he came from the south. Now, of course, if you land on the southern slopes of the Himalaya, that's like also very plausible, because even higher up in the north, it's unlikely that the sea would have reached that high. But so it says that he came from the south. Now, what is the south? Looking at it from Himachal, south of it you get Punjab. Then in Punjab, it's very easy to make the road to Persia, or the other way around. So first he came from the west, from Armenia to Punjab, and there he turned north to, or the incipient Indo-European language family turned north. And so there you get this concept of him coming from the south, integrated into this concept of an Armenian homeland. Somehow they can be reconciled. So yeah, that's nice. That's a possibility. So I wouldn't discard it too easily. And somehow it's more fun to argue with that theory, even if you disagree with it, than with the theory of an invasion from the northwest, with which, you know, Indians have had a lot of trouble over the years. So that's a possibility. That's one candidate. And so in the West now, if you talk about controversies over the homeland, what they think of is not the Indian
Versus.
Yes, in fact, very many scholars have never heard of the out of India theory. And those who have heard of it have never studied it. Because they've been told by Wikipedia or something that this comes from the ugly, vicious Hindu nationalists. And so they think, oh, it's not worth it. It's one of these crazy, internet trolls. So they just don't know about it. And so what they think of is the controversy between north of the Black Sea and south of the Black Sea, north of the Caucasus, south of the Caucasus. So those are the two main candidates.
Okay. And just by the way, which is the oldest and historically attested Indo-European language?
Yeah, well, that is also a point of controversy. So the oldest one attested, I think, is definitely Sanskrit, because we get the first hymns of the Rig Veda around, and here, of course, this is very controversial, but I think the case for it is quite strong, from about 3300 BC, which happens to be like exactly the time when the first writings appeared in Egypt and Mesopotamia. So Hittite appears only in like 1700 BC or so. However, Hittite has elements that seem to be linguistically anterior to Sanskrit. So the Proto-Indo-European, the mother tongue of all these Indo-European languages, as it has been reconstructed, follows very much the model of Sanskrit. And so the discovery of Hittite around 1900 drew attention to the fact that clearly this must be an earlier stage. Like, for instance, two main points that are very remarkable. One is the laryngeal consonants. Laryngeal consonants exist in the Semitic languages, like in Arabic. So they are throat sounds. And so they're fully in existence in Arabic. In Hebrew, they have more or less disappeared. And so that's an interesting fact that you see that these sounds tend to disappear. You see, very few languages have disappearing dental sounds, for instance, D, T. They are natural, persistent. In some languages, in some positions, these sounds disappear, but they reappear elsewhere, and so on. They're like permanent. They're in all languages. These laryngeals are a bit more difficult to pronounce also. And so they do disappear in all Indo-European languages that exist today, but it's not implausible that they existed at one time and disappeared in Indo-European too. And so in the case of Hittite, you do find them very explicitly. In Greek, they leave strong traces. And then there's a whole subdiscipline in Indo-European studies of reconstructing the laryngeals and finding their remaining traces in all the other branches. But so that points to an earlier stage, a pre-Sanskritic stage of Indo-European. Another is the fact that it has no masculine and feminine gender. I mean, you see, if I were a woke ideologue, I'd use that to the hilt to say there is nothing natural about the division in masculine and feminine. Look, this language did without it.
Or at least you could use Hittite for a gender neutral address.
Yes, of course. Nobody knows Hittite. You see,
That is the
but
problem.
more than 1 billion people speak Chinese.
Ah.
Chinese also has no grammatical gender.
Okay.
Indeed, even the distinction between the pronouns he and she didn't exist until the 19th century,
In
when
Chinese.
it was artificially taken over from English or Russian, so from Indo-European at any rate. It was taken over, so the character for he was modified to give it a feminine form, so the two exist in written language. In spoken language, they're still the same. When they speak about ta, you don't know if they mean he or she. But so at any rate, that's an earlier stage, and it has been reconstructed how the use of certain demonstrative pronouns helped in, transforming the language into this gendered language. So that, is a stage already past in the case of Sanskrit. It's a fully gendered language. So you could say, yes, you see, Hittite represents an earlier stage. Oh, there's one more indication for that. It's the evolution, the semantic evolution of certain words. Like you have the word for die, mur, like murtyu in Sanskrit, mourir in French, and so on. A mortal victim in English. So that root in Hittite does not mean to die, but to disappear. And you can see that semantic evolution, that to disappear comes to mean to die, because of the frequent use of euphemisms. You don't want to shock people by bringing up the topic of death, so you start using the word disappear.
As
But
in pass away.
Yes, exactly. And so ultimately that simply comes to mean to die. So anyway, there are a number of reasons to say Hittite is anterior to Sanskrit. However, that doesn't mean that it's older than Sanskrit. You see, the Hittite that we know is from the 2nd millennium BC.
Correct.
So you could crudely deduce that Sanskrit therefore is younger. But you see, that's not a valid reasoning. For example, in Indo-European you had a number of case endings. You have 8 in Sanskrit, 6 in Latin, 5 in Greek. You still have 4 in modern German, and you have none in French or in English. Now, that says nothing about their age. You see, some languages have drastically evolved, and some have retained certain ancient practices. And usually, a language that has strongly evolved in one respect has retained ancient forms in another respect. So, you see, you can't deduce the age of a language like this. It's an interesting phenomenon, it deserves to be studied and so on, but you can't make these simplistic conclusions from it. So it's perfectly possible that in this respect, Hittite preserved certain ancient characteristics that disappeared in the other branches. So I think that Sanskrit is older than Hittite, or the Sanskrit that we have and the Hittite that we have. This is the occasion for making a little remark on a recent discussion in the papers and so on, which is the oldest language in the world, or at least in India. Prime Minister Modi has praised Tamil, saying that it's the oldest language.
In the world.
Yeah. Now, in the world, you see, maybe the world that Indians know, but at any rate, it's older than Sanskrit. That's the point. And so all the Dravidian chauvinists have, applauded that statement and highlighted it. Well, first of all, linguistically, that's a pretty absurd concept, which language is older. I've studied ancient Tamil long ago and I forgot every word of it.
Okay.
But nevertheless, this much I retain from it, that language and modern Tamil are mutually very different.
Yes.
Even if you don't know the Tamil script, you just look at a bilingual edition of ancient Tamil, like the Tirukural. It's a Tamil scripture from like 2300 BC. No, 2300 years ago, 300 BC. And so when you compare the modern Tamil text and the ancient Tamil text, you see that the modern is twice as long. And so you see that there's a big difference. Even without knowing the language, you can't miss this fact. So to say that the Tamil spoken today was already spoken then is a bit inaccurate. Anyway, people's ancestors also spoke a language. You had ancestors 100 years ago, you had ancestors 3,000 years ago, and so on, and they all spoke a language. And if they hadn't been forced to change language, or change language because of opportunities or because of migration, then they spoke the same language, only in an earlier form. So, I mean, the question is a bit silly, but I see the point. You see, what they want to say is that the Indus civilization, which they think is pre-Vedic, I don't think so, but that's a very common assumption now, that civilization spoke Tamil, or Dravidian at any rate. And so, therefore, it's older than Vedic Sanskrit, and in that sense, it's the oldest language. So, by the way, it also shows that the BJP, the Hindu nationalists, and so on, are not the force behind the out of India theory. They, voice assumptions presupposing the Aryan invasion all the time. Like, for instance, they use the word Adivasi, original inhabitants, for the tribals of India, which is a missionary coinage from the 20th century, falsely giving the impression that there is some ancient Sanskritic, attestation for an awareness that the tribals are original and they themselves, the Sanskrit speakers, are intruders. So that's completely false. But you see, that term is now common and is not questioned by the BJP at all. So this Tamil the oldest is another example of this. So I don't think so. I mean, the oldest language that we know of in India, that we have compositions from, is definitely Sanskrit. Of course, the decipherment of the Hindu script also has a word to say on this. And so the latest and credible decipherments vote for Sanskrit. But that's another discussion altogether.
Exactly.
But so to answer your question, among the Indo-European languages, I think very definitely Sanskrit is the oldest.
Okay, which are more particular.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.